My name is Chris Zagurski, and this is my Music Time Capsule project. The songs I've selected are divided into two categories: songs that have been historically impactful and songs that have an it factor to them. There is one exception: John Denver's Country Roads. I believe this to be a true hybrid of the two categories, and the categories are not permanent, but the songs themselves show one of these aspects a little more than the other, but they interconnect very often. The songs that I've chosen that are historically impactful are Jenny Jenny by Little Richard, Elvis Presley's Hound Dog, Please Please Me by the Beatles, and Maggie's Farm by Bob Dylan. Uh, Jenny Jenny, released in 1957 by Little Richard, had a huge impact because he added the rhythm and blues aspects into music that could be seen by the public audience. And the rhythm and blues aspects were just his emotion and power that he put in the music. For ages, the music was all the same pop tunes sung by artists with really refined voices, but it was practically the same melody almost every time. And Little Richard, he just added so much more emotion and power into both his lyrics and the instruments that just blasted audiences away. It was something different that they could listen to instead of just how much is that doggy in the window. It's not a complicated piece. It's all just about one girl, and the it repeats itself very often. But the song was just so impactful because he just gave them something new to listen to, and it wasn't just the same song that was targeted to the older generation. Uh, Hand in hand with him is Elvis Presley singing Hound Dog. Hound Dog is another rhythm and blues song, but the already known rockabilly singer decided to take Big Mama Thornton's song and use it to inspire the new generation. He did this because the older demographics saw him as vulgar for the way he moved his hips and acted on stage, but the younger audiences loved it. And when he goes on live television, they would always ask him and they'd beg him to please just stop moving in this obscene manner, but he would just say no, and he'd sing his very bluesy song, and uh, all the younger audiences would go ballistic over the way he moved because it was something that their parents didn't like, but they liked. It was an inspiration of the new generation of music that was for the young people instead of their parents. Um, it was produced in 1956, so it was a little before Little Richard's time, but the two go hand in hand with creating a sound that was rock and roll. They He was the king of rock while Little Richard backed him up, and they created just the sound of a new generation. Elvis inspired many artists to try and become as big as he was, as well as Little Richard. And rock kind of hit a dead period for a while, but across the Atlantic, the Beatles were starting to pick up power, and they helped start the British invasion to bring rock and roll back across the pond over to the States. Their song Please Please Me was a little more obvious in its vulgarity to it. By today's standards, it's not vulgar at all, but back then, if they looked into it, they would kind of be a little concerned about what the lyrics were, but most of their songs were like this anyway. But this was their first in a 16 number one streak in the top charts for them, and it just made them legendary in England as well as the U.S. They were like one of the biggest rock bands in history, and this popularity that Please Please Me gave them was uh, the very song that helped them be able to experiment with different aspects of music, like adding in psychedelic pieces or experimenting in new sounds or new ways of describing music itself. And it if they didn't have this first big hit, they wouldn't have been able to create all these new sounds and styles that became music today. The Twist by Chubby Checker was another song that helped bring music into a new light because it was music that they could dance to. The song itself is just about the dance. It's very lighthearted, it's non obscene, it's non threatening in any manner. It's just a basic harmony between the Chubby Checker's voice and the lyrics of the Fat Boys playing in the background with their instruments. And it helped bring rock and roll and all music that was trapped in the underground areas into the light because dancing was the way to people's hearts back in the 1960s because they didn't have a lot of other things like we do today, like TV and video games. So dancing was what they did to pass the time. So when rock and roll began something that you could dance to, many artists adopted this style so they could be seen in the public light and be accepted by the masses. Lastly, on the historical impacting songs is Bob Dylan's Maggie's Farm. Maggie's Farm was played at the Newport Festival in 1965 and was hugely impactful because Bob Dylan, an already famous folk singer, decided that he would, instead of bringing the acoustic guitar that was clung to by every folk artist, he decided to pick up some electric instruments and then play it and take folk music and go electric, which was just blasphemy to everybody at the festival. He was booed off the stage almost immediately because rock instruments were just completely unacceptable in folk music. And it's strange to think that's a song that the first time he played it, he was immediately hated for it, could be so impactful. But it was impactful because without playing it and that hate that made it well known, rock and roll wouldn't have been able to adopt what he brought. He brought the aspects of folk music which questioned life itself and had meaning to it. And rock and roll could finally adopt it. And that made rock and roll much more profound than what it could have been previously, because now it had folk elements that could let it discuss any issue it wanted. So rock wasn't trapped into these basic categories anymore. It was much more free to talk about any social issue, any political issue, the economy, anything it wanted to. And it was limitless. So rock and roll could touch any style that we know of today. It could talk about anything, even now. These 5 songs were super impactful to music because it took pop music, such as How Much Is That Doggy in the Window, and basically tossed it away. I mean, pop still exists, but it's completely different than what was happening back in the 50s and 60s, because instead of just one clear voice, you had energy and emotion from rhythm and blues, thanks to artists like Little Richard. You had people who could talk about real issues, such as Bob Dylan. Elvis helped create it to where it's about the younger generation instead of just appealing to the older demographic. Chubby Checker made it to where audiences in the mass crowd could listen and dance to rock and roll. The Beatles helped revive rock and roll in America, but also made rock famous in England and the rest of Europe. And they all became legends into what rock and roll can be and had huge influences on what we define as music today. Not only in rock, but the songs were even the roots of the songs could be completely different than what they were previously. Country could pick up electric guitars. Pop rock could talk about social issues, anything. They had the ability to now talk about anything, play any way they want, and the masses would listen. And that's why these 5 songs should be sealed into history, because They changed music from something that the older generation listened to into something that could be heard and meant something to the younger generation as well as the older generation.